to produce the goods and services they're selling. In addition to the limitations on the demand for workers, we think the unemployment rate is also being held up by some structural factors. Mismatches between the available workers and available jobs, the effects of...
President, I ask unanimous consent that proceedings under the call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I thought I would bring our colleagues up to date on what is going on since the evening is getting late. We are close, I believe, to working out an agreement for a vote on an amendment that was offered by Senator Paul earlier. It has to do with extending to executive branch officials the same kinds of reporting requirements and ban on insider trading that would apply to members of Congress and their staff. It's an amendment that enjoys the support of both of the managers and the principal authors of this bill. What we're trying to do is to make sure, however, that we narrow the amendment so that it applies to top-level federal employees and not to low-level federal employees who have no policy responsibilities. So we were looking at limiting it to Senate-confirmed positions. The problem with that is it brings in all of the military appointments that are Senate-confirmed. So we want to make sure that we exclude those individuals who are clearly not the target of the amendment. So we continue to work, the managers of the bill, the sponsors of the bill, and the sponsor of the amendment, Senator Paul, in order to refine his amendment. It is still our hope that we can reach that compromise and have a roll call vote tonight. We'll keep our colleagues informed about whether it's going to be possible to complete the drafting that would be needed to modify his amendment. In the meantime, Madam President, I want to just talk very briefly about another amendment that Senator Paul just filed. It's Amendment 1490. This is an amendment that would require former members of Congress to forfeit their federal retirement benefits if they work as a lobbyist or engage in any lobbying activities, regardless, I might say, of whether they served 40 years in this body. And I would also note that the language in this amendment is extraordinarily broad. For example, the definition of remuneration includes salaries, any payment for services not otherwise identified as salary, such as consulting fees, honoraria, and paid authorship. Think about that, Madam President. As I read the language, the former member of Congress who writes a book would be in danger of forfeiting his or her pension. In other words, this is going to apply to authors. It mentions honoraria. So if a former member of Congress gives a speech and receives $1,000 for giving that speech, that former member is going to forfeit his or her pension, earned pension. I don't even know that this would pass constitutional muster, but there's certainly a fairness issue, it seems to me. Now, I don't know if the intent of the senator from Kentucky, Senator Paul, was to draft this as broadly as he did to include and to define as remuneration paid authorship. In other words, if you wrote a book, it wouldn't even have to be a book. What if you wrote a newspaper article What if you wrote an op-ed for the Washington Post and received $250 for that? Do you forfeit your federal pension? What if you worked in the private sector for a number of years, worked in state government for a number of years, and then worked for a few years serving the people of this country in Congress? Would you then forfeit your pension if you provided some lobbying activities? If you wrote a book? If you gave a speech for money? This is extraordinarily broad. I see that the Senate Majority Leader is on the Senate floor, so I will stop discussing this amendment. But I did want our colleagues to actually read the text of this amendment before we ever vote on it. As I was saying, it defines remuneration not just as salary or payment for services not otherwise identified as salary, but consulting fees, honoraria, and paid authorship. In other words, if after being in Congress you wrote a book or you wrote an op-ed for which you were paid, you forfeit your federal pension because you did some lobbying activities? This just strikes me as a very sweeping amendment that does not belong on this bill. Thank you, Madam President.
I'm very happy that I had the opportunity to hear.
The Majority Leader.
I'm happy to hear what that amendment does. Thank you. Mr. President, Madam President, I ask consent that the Senate now proceed to consideration S-Res 359.
The clerk will report.
Senate Resolution 359 commending Alan S. Fruman on his service to the United States Senate.
I had asked the clerk to read the entire resolution.
The clerk will read the resolution.
Whereas Alan S. Fruman, a native of New Rochelle, New York, and graduate of Colgate University and Georgetown University Law Center, began his long career with Congress in the House of Representatives Precedence Writing Office in April of 1974. Whereas Alan S. Fruman began work with the Secretary of the Senate's Office of the Senate Parliamentarian on January 1, 1977, serving under 8 majority leaders. Whereas Alan S. Fruman served the Senate as its parliamentarian from 1987 to 1995 and from 2001 to 2012, and as parliamentarian emeritus since 1997, whereas Alan S. Fruman revised the Senate's book on procedure, Riddick's Senate Procedure, and is the only sitting parliamentarian to have published a compilation of the body's work, whereas Alan S. Fruman has shown tremendous dedication to the Senate during his 35 years of service, whereas Alan S. Fruman has earned the respect and affection of the senators, their staffs, and all of his colleagues for his extensive knowledge of all matters relating to the Senate, his fairness and thoughtfulness, whereas Alan S. Fruman now retires from the Senate after 35 years to spend more time with his wife, Jill, and his daughter, Allie. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Senate expresses its appreciation to Alan S. Fruman and commends him for his lengthy, faithful, and outstanding service to the Senate. Resolved that the Secretary of the Senate shall transmit a copy of this resolution to Alan S. Fruman.
I ask consent.
Without objection, the Senate will proceed to the measure.
I ask consent, Madam President, the resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, and the motion reconsider be laid upon the table. And I would ask members of the Senate to join in sponsoring this amendment, this resolution, I'm sorry.
Without objection, so ordered.
Congratulations. Madam President,
From Maine.
Madam President, I just want to join in saluting Alan for his many years of work. He is someone that all of us know to be an honest broker who calls them as he sees them, who withstands at times tremendous pressures, and who has just extraordinary knowledge that all of us have come to rely upon. So on behalf of the Republican side of the aisle, I'm sure that I'm speaking for our members as well in saluting Alan and wishing him well and thanking him for his many years of dedicated public service. We wish you well.
Madam President,
Senator from Connecticut.
I thank the Chair. I'd be remiss if I didn't because I'm in the chamber, say a word of thanks to Alan Fruman for his service to the Senate. When I first came to the Senate in 1989, had the privilege to occupy the chair, I had two great mentors. One was the great Senator for West Virginia, Robert C. Byrd. The other was Alan Fruman. And both were steadfastly reliable. I was just one of many who sat in the chair, were often asked questions whose answers did not immediately spring to mind. And there was a voice that I heard. In this case, it was not from above, but from slightly below, that clarified exactly what the rules of the Senate required. So Alan's been a true and faithful public servant, really held himself to the highest standards and helped this inherently unruly body to be ruly. And for that, I thank him and wish him well in the next chapter of his life. I thank the Chair. Absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
President,
The senator from Illinois,
I ask consent the quorum call be suspended.
without objection.
Madam President, pending before the Senate is the Stock Act, and the purpose is one that I support. It's a bill that I co-sponsored. And the notion behind it is that members of Congress should not use their public service or information gained in their public service for private benefit. It basically outlaws the type of insider trading and conflict of interest that should be a standard and will be a standard after this is enacted into law. Amendments have been proposed to this measure, and there is one in particular that I heard about earlier and asked for a copy. This is an amendment proposed by the senator from Kentucky, Senator Paul, and it's an amendment which talks about members of Congress forfeiting their federal retirement benefits and the conditions under which they would forfeit their federal retirement benefits. Understand that these are members of Congress who have completed enough service in the Congress to qualify for a pension. It's my understanding that is about 6 years. So at a minimum of 6 years of service, members of Congress receive some pension benefits. Certainly those benefits increase the longer they've served. This bill would disqualify them from pensions that they have been credited and earned as members of Congress under 3 conditions. First, should they decide after they have served in Congress to serve as a registered lobbyist. That in and of itself is breathtaking. To think that if a person should decide after service in Congress to become a registered lobbyist with or without compensation, I might add, for perhaps a nonprofit organization, they would forfeit their federal pension. That in and of itself is unacceptable and inexplicable. But then it gets worse. This amendment goes on to say that a member of Congress retired forfeits his federal pension if he accepts any kind of remuneration, which could be a salary, a consulting fee, even an honorarium for giving a speech, from any company or other private entity that employs a registered lobbyist. Think about that for a second. If a retired member of Congress in Illinois should give a speech to a gathering of the management of Caterpillar Tractor Company in Peoria about their experience in Congress and their views on issues in Washington, give a speech and receive any compensation for giving that speech, they would forfeit their federal pension because Caterpillar Tractor Company has a paid lobbyist in Washington. Then it gets worse. The third provision says that a retired member of Congress would forfeit their pension if they accept that remuneration from any company or private entity that does business with the federal government. Is using the mail service doing business with the federal government? Would most businesses in America, therefore, be doing business with the federal government because they use the mail service? And if so, if I take compensation from that company, I've forfeited my federal pension? What is the purpose of this? Other than to just basically harass members of Congress in their retirement. There are certainly situations where a person could forfeit their pension based on misconduct, for example, or convictions for crime. That's understandable. But this has gone way too far. I hope that members of the Senate will read this amendment. It's very brief, 2 pages long, and in reading it realize that this is something that should not be offered, and if offered, should be defeated. It does nothing to make this a better place to serve. It raises serious questions about the rights of individuals who have served their nation in Congress and what they're going to do after they leave the service of the United States. I urge my colleagues to defeat the amendment offered by the senator from Kentucky, and I yield the floor.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Mr. President, I would ask suspension of the quorum call.
The senator from Michigan, without objection.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I rise today to speak about the Stock Act, and I want to start by thanking the leaders on the floor, Senator Lieberman, Senator Collins, for their hard work and leadership in bringing this to the floor. Mr. President, there should not be any question that members of Congress should be held accountable to the same laws that every other American are held to. And that's why in November, Senator Gillibrand, Senator Tester, and I introduced the Stock Act to prohibit members of Congress from engaging in insider trading. This bill is common sense. The American people deserve to know that their representatives in Congress are doing what's right for the country, not trying to strike it rich by trading on insider information. My constituents are certainly wondering why this isn't law already, and that's a good question. It certainly is a question I asked myself last year when there were news reports raising this issue, and I was very pleased to join immediately with my colleagues to put forward this legislation to make it absolutely clear that insider trading by members of Congress is a violation of the law. I want to thank, as I indicated before, the senator from Connecticut and the senator from Maine for moving this bill through their committee, bringing it to the floor. Appreciate very much the 93 senators that voted last night to move the bill forward. And it's, I think, a very important example of bipartisan support. And I'm hoping that we'll be able to move this forward for a simple up or down vote this week, that we will not see extraneous issues or obstruction or delay involved in this issue. This is very simple and very straightforward, and I'm hopeful that we'll be able to move it forward and accomplish this goal. We need to move forward to make sure that it's very clear that the same laws that everyone else adheres to also are held to be true for members of Congress. And it's important also to note that our bill creates new reporting requirements for members of Congress and their staffs, with the reports available online with searchable database. This is very important for transparency. And it asks the Government Accounting Office to investigate the so-called political intelligence consultants who contact members and staff to get information on how legislation could affect their business clients or stock prices. Mr. President, this bill really is very simple and very clear-cut. We all are engaged in conversations on a daily basis that make information available to us, and we need to make it very clear our responsibilities for handling that information and operating in the public interest. So I'm hopeful that we will be able to keep this bill focused on the intended goal so we can actually get it passed, get it over to the House, and have the House do the same thing. It's important, while there may be a number of different issues we all care about that we would like to offer on amendments, I'm hopeful that we will be able to keep this focused on the issues in front of us, and that we will be able to get this done as quickly as possible. So our constituents are certainly looking to us to be able to do this. This would be an excellent way to start the new year working together on a bipartisan basis to close a loophole that's created confusion about the responsibilities, the ethics and the legal responsibilities for senators as it relates to insider information and potential insider trading. So I'm hopeful we can get this done. I appreciate everyone that's been involved in helping to get us to this point, and hopefully by the end of the week we will have something passed that we can all feel very good about. Thank you, Mr. President, and I would